When I say the words planned economy, what is it that comes to mind? If you, like me, are well marinated in the anti-communist propaganda that is living in North America, you'd probably think of things like bread lines, shortages, 5-year plans, and starvation. Or if you're terminally online like me, you might remember this picture of a man who went to Cuba and was dismayed by the lack of variety of LCD televisions. Anyways, it's almost a truism to say planned economy, bad. When we talk about the sort of historical analysis of former communist states, one of the first criticisms of communist systems that comes to mind is always planned economies. And this isn't even unique to like the right. You have market socialists who thought that planned economies were inefficient, and you have mutualists who are a form of anarchists who believe that we need to replace the economy. We need to get rid of capitalism, but keep markets, because there's just this baked-in assumption that markets are good and that they are responsive and that they are responsible for all of the wonders of the world we live in, and that they are the solution to our economic problems. Specifically, the problem of responding to demand and supply and making sure we don't have shortages or unnecessary surplus. But I have one thing to posit. What if planned economies are good, actually? And the place that we can look to show the power and efficiency of a strong and well-centralized planned economy is Walmart. Hi, I'm Max, the Meatball Sub-Reviewer, and this is Tristan Won't Shut Up. When you look at the economy that we live in today, you see a capitalist one. You see companies, these firms, in competition with each other to try and outcompete for best prices or market share in order to outgrow the other competition and become the most powerful. We're told this is actually a really, really good system. If these firms are competing with each other, then that means that there's constant innovation and development, and that the forces and incentives push us all towards making things more efficient and more better for everybody. But let's look at the economy in a slightly different light. When really, if you think about organizations just as a concept, they have different structures, they have different functions, and they have different dominions over different parts of our lives. Most families, I would say, have a sort of anarchist structure. You aren't bound to be a member of it. You can leave if you want. It can be difficult, but you could. And in a well-functioning family, there isn't like a hierarchical command structure that uses violence in order to support its power. In the public sphere, we belong to an organization called a government. We have no choice on whether or not we can be a member, and they have total control over all of the police forces, military forces, things like that. It's way less democratic than, say, like a family or like a club or a small organization, because you really only get to have your say kinda by choosing a delegate to make decisions on your behalf every few years or so. But at least there is something in the system that does request your input, which makes it more democratic than, say, a corporation. Because the private corporation that you work for, you have no say on how things are run. You have no say on how things are done. The corporate structure is very hierarchical and is done through absolute decree, with no room for democracy unless you're like in a co-op or you have a very strong union. And you see, looking at society like an anarchist would, where states are one organization amongst many, you can see the very glaring flaws and how in a good chunk of our lives we have no say over what happens to us, and that's something that we should really be addressing. And if you look at things this way, this sort of body without organs analyzation of organizations, you'll find that yes, there is a market economy, there is competition between corporations. But when you look at the internal structure of the largest corporations, things are very, very different. And this is a huge deal because many of the larger corporations in the world have internal economies that are on par with many countries. So for example, Walmart has an economy about the size of like Switzerland or Sweden, and yet it's a private corporation. And you would think that a corporation the size of a country, the internal mechanisms on how they get things to and from where they need to go would be an economy of sorts, would it not? So under liberal ideology, markets are considered superior because the price of a commodity is a piece of information that organically changes and responds to so many different factors that could affect the availability and desirability of a commodity that it becomes a useful metric for understanding an object's value. Price, theoretically, is determined by complex relationships between supply, demand, quality, use factor, all of those things together, even perceived value as opposed to actual value. So in theory, markets are great. In practice, they don't seem to work out very well. There's often large mismatches between the price of a good and the actual value. There are many times in the study of macroeconomics where you can see that the price of a commodity is in extreme disarray compared to all of those factors I mentioned earlier: supply, demand, perceived value, etc. And the result of these mismatches are what we call economic bubbles and economic crashes. Economic bubbles are literally when certain commodities are valued at much higher than their actual value. And when that bubble bursts, it leads to huge economic downturns and big recessions like we had in the 1930s or right now. We've also seen issues with the way that markets function because they fail to respond to incentives and goals that do not affect short-term profitability. For example, environmental regulations, climate change, workers' rights, things like that. I think the ultimate example of this is antibiotic resistance, which is a growing threat in our medical system. Bacteria are evolving to become more resistant to antibiotics we're developing. And we already have some bacteria that are completely resistant to everything we can throw at them. If this becomes normal in bacteria, and it's becoming more and more normal, we could be turning back the dial on medical science over a century. I don't really want the day where a random cut could be your death. But because developing new antibiotics only have a certain window when they're valuable because antibiotic resistance, therefore it's not very profitable to spend the millions of dollars to develop them. So what happens is, in our economy where all of our medical research is done by private corporations, we just don't develop new antibiotics. And that's gonna get real dangerous real soon. So given all these mismatches and inefficiencies, it's actually pretty safe to say that markets work in theory, but they don't really work in practice. Planned economies are kind of the opposite. Planned economies don't work in theory. Any economist who studies shows that there's really like an information overload problem that planned economy really can't factor for. So a theoretical parity between the value of an object and its actual price is never going to be hit as well. But what happens is that in practice, planned economies do actually work. The Soviet Union might have had issues, and again, that has been overblown because of, Cold War propaganda, but there were still problems. I won't lie about that. Trying to run the second largest economy in the mid-20th century with computers that were the size of school buses would have definitely been pretty complex, and doing so efficiently would have been pretty bad. But I will tell you that there is an example of a highly efficient, highly responsive planned economy where things get to where they're needed right away. There are very few issues with logistics and operations. Shortages are rare, and excesses are rare as well. And that is the internal operations and logistics of the corporation known as Walmart. Walmart's one of the largest corporations on earth. And one of the reasons why Walmart is so successful is because it is one of the intellectual leaders in the bleeding edge development of logistics and operations. A lot of people think that has to do with just like the can-do spirit of the Walton family when it was founded, but no, it's really about the hyper development they've done in the realm of operations and logistics, which is a fancy way of saying getting the stuff from suppliers to stores and making sure that what they get is not too much, not too little, and it's the right kind of stuff to respond to the demand in the stores. So Walmart does compete as a corporation, but on the inside, it doesn't. Walmart stores don't compete with each other. They are all highly cooperative, coordinated, and planned. The entire distribution system, from the suppliers all the way down to the shelves, is all vertically integrated, sharing information with each other, and that is because it was the most efficient system for managing the stores. And it's able to manage a fairly large economy with highly coordinated planning. Walmart's valuation in 2017 was slightly over half of the Soviet Union's GDP at its height. So it's a pretty big economy that is completely centrally planned. And with this planned economy, Walmart manages over 11,000 stores in 27 countries with over 70 suppliers. It truly is a marvel of logistics. And how does it do it? What is Walmart doing that's so amazing? It has a very sophisticated computerized system that manages stock all the way from the suppliers to the store. One of the things that Walmart does very well is something called distribution centers. So distribution centers are essentially organizations that don't run stores specifically, but they run networks of stores and basically make sure that variety and price are kept low so that they can stock multiple different outlets. A good example of this would be like a small indie record store. If you were to go to a record store and ask for a record that they didn't have, they'd be like, I'm sorry, our distributor doesn't have it, because a record store would not be able to maintain a relationship for buying stock from multiple different record companies. So instead of every mom and pop record store having individual contracts with all of these different record suppliers, what you do have are big distributors, which would buy from all of these different people and collect them, and then stores would sign up to them to get supplied by the distribution center. Walmart has that, and it's completely in store, which means that all of the Walmart locations send information in real time about what's being sold to the distributors. The distributors know the second that you buy that Tickle Me Elmo that another Tickle Me Elmo's been bought, and so they have all of the price signals and purchase signals to know exactly what's going on in all of the stores. If they had been competing with each other, they wouldn't want to share this information, because if they could have that information, they'd have a competitive edge, and therefore there's no incentive. But there's collaboration all the way up the cycle. The main innovation that Walmart's success hinges upon is something called continuous replenishment. It was developed as a solution to something that's called the bullwhip problem, which in logistics is sort of like the capitalist version of Stalin-era shortages. What you have is that up a supply chain, you have a logistics path that doesn't share a whole lot of information. So say even if there is a small change in the demand on a product, say at the store level, as you go up the supply chain, the disruption will become bigger and bigger. And what you end up with is huge disparities between supply and demand. And you end up with big warehouses that are completely filled with unsold products, or worse, complete empty products and crippling shortages on high-in-demand products. So continuous replenishment solves that by every single store sharing information the entire way up the chain and having deliveries come much more frequently. At Walmart, every time a product is purchased, the information about the purchase goes right to the distributor, and deliveries are made daily. It is real-time, instantaneous data, and at this point, highly automated, so that the information about what products are in demand or not in demand goes all the way up the chain smoothly with no competition between each other. Which, like we know through history, that competing firms won't do this with each other. They won't share this information. Suppliers find this to be a very productive way of getting consistent business, and it takes a lot of risk out of the process of being a supplier. And so what happens is that these suppliers sort of become amalgamated into the greater Walmart ecosystem, to the point where some organizational theorists would call Walmart more of a super firm that has all of these other suppliers like amalgamated into its overall whole. And this is so much of an overwhelming success that other companies copy the model. But if you're a free market fundamentalist, this much cooperation and information sharing should be detrimental. It's too much centralized planning. Where's the market? If the market is the best and most efficient way to run things, shouldn't Walmart be an absolute disaster? Maybe Walmart would be even more successful if it run itself like a business on the inside. And to answer that critique, we're going to go and look at another company called Sears. So Sears was having a rough few years, and in order to come in at the last minute and solve their problems, they got a new CEO by the name of Edward Lampert. Lampert worshipped Ayn Rand, the free market fundamentalist and libertarian philosopher that so many of the most annoying people that you knew in university worshipped. And so he decided that, of course, Sears' problem is that it doesn't run itself like a business. So his plan was to bring free markets and competition to Sears. All the different departments of the Sears organization were decoupled from each other and became semi-independent firms within the overall umbrella. If you were the fashion department and you wanted to use the brands that were associated with Sears, you had to make a contract with a marketing department in order for them to market your products. And so every single part had to run itself like its own little business. And if you are a capitalist, you would think this is perfect. The competition will lead to innovation, it'll lead to higher efficiency, and all of them will get better because they know that their existence depends on them being able to outcompete each other. They even brought in the neoliberal economist and social media influencer, author of Freakonomics, Steve Levitt, to oversee it. And you know what? It did not go well. No, it was real bad. Let's just talk about what happened and just how bad it got. So for example, if the apparel department wanted to use the services of the IT department, they would need to negotiate out a contract. Or if they wanted marketing materials, they would have to negotiate with marketing. Though if they couldn't strike a good deal, they were allowed to use outside contractors for these things. And one of the number one things that caused this sort of implosion of Sears over this was that these departments often would go with outside sources, even if it hurt the overall profitability of Sears because it helped their department's profitability specifically. Let's just give one example. One of the biggest brands at Sears is Kenmore. Big appliance brand, very popular. The appliance department, if it wanted to sell Kenmore appliances, needed to make an agreement with the branding department in order to do so. But what they found very quickly is that if they sold non-Kenmore products, if they made an agreement with an outside supplier, they actually would get a better deal. So what happened was that in the appliance department, in a lot of Sears stores, the non-Kenmore branded products would start to get more prominent displays and take up more floor space than the in-house brand, which decreased Sears' overall profitability because now they were selling fewer of their branded products, but it was better for the overall profitability of the appliance department. The same thing happened with the tools department. They didn't like the agreement they had with the in-store brand of batteries, so they went with an outside contractor, which resulted in fewer battery sales for Sears, but better profits for the tool department. With every executive, with the heads of every single department being their own CEO of their sort of micro internal company, at big corporate meetings, they had to wear screen protectors over their laptops so that industrial espionage inside their own corporation couldn't happen. And there'd be drop-down fights and screaming matches over like how much floor space different departments would get at stores. For the famous Sears catalog, there'd be big fights about how much space would be given to different departments, all of them trying to advance themselves at the expense of everybody else. What you wound up with was some perplexing results in their catalog. Things like screwdrivers being sold right next to the lingerie, or most famously, a dirt bike for young boys being featured prominently in the Mother's Day edition of the Sears catalog. And as all of this competition started to drive down Sears' profits, the competition got even more nasty and brutal. One of the things that proves this point so closely, but also brought profits down, is they started duplicating labor. So instead of negotiating with the IT department, these departments would then develop their own IT departments because they didn't want to share costs with the other departments they were in competition with. So they started just making their own micro corporations within the company and then running those in a sort of vertically integrated, cooperative, centralized planned economy. The epic failure of Sears was analyzed by business analysts. And one of the things that they came up with is that this whole process fell apart because of a lack of cooperation between departments. Who'd have thought? The other big area of innovation that takes the planned economy to the next level is the wunderkind of corporations these days, Amazon. When Amazon was starting to make the transition from a bookstore to an everything store, they wanted to expand and become a strong data-driven corporation. So one of the things that they did is they snatched up tons and tons of the intellectual powerhouses behind everything that was successful at Walmart. So much so that Walmart actually sued Amazon for headhunting all of their big developers. And the amount of integration and automation that Amazon has puts Walmart to shame. There's so much more information that Amazon has that Walmart could not even come close to understanding. Walmart can understand buying patterns in stores. Amazon knows exactly how long you looked at a product. When you put it in your shopping cart, when you take it out of your shopping cart, you literally have a list of items that you would like to buy someday. All of this information is really important to understand demand. And through like artificial intelligence and analysis of data, Amazon is becoming so smart that it's able to anticipate demand on products before people even know that they are anticipating demand on a product. And they're able to make decisions about purchasing, logistics, warehousing before the people who are going to purchase the product can even conceive of it. And now Amazon is taking that information and hiring big data analysts to possibly make the most efficient and data-driven planned economy in human history. And it makes you remember that Allende, who was a socialist leader of Chile for a while before he was overthrown by a fascist neoliberal government, was trying to make something called CyberSyn, which was this project to sort of digitize the planned economy of socialist Chile and just make it all kind of work integrated together through this computerized system. It was in the 70s, so it was very like rudimentary, but it was a very interesting idea. This topic is one that has been high on the list of something to make a step back video about someday. And so maybe this is just me testing the waters a little bit. Now we are, production-wise, so close to living in a post-scarcity economy. We actually have a big issue with overproduction. In our capitalist system, we produce 40% more products than we actually use. And all I can kind of pose to end this is imagine if it wasn't just the economies of these corporations. What if we stole these innovations and used it to plan all of the economy? Can you imagine how much more efficient and focused it'd be? And on top of that, we can use it to maximize incentives that aren't necessarily making the most amount of profit. We can use it to address material need for everyone equally, and also incentivize things that the market has been fundamentally unable to manage. You know, things like revamping our energy grid, vaccinating everybody if there was a huge pandemic. I wonder how that would go. Developing those necessary antibiotics. And you know, just the big question about making sure that everybody gets all of the things that they need and want. Isn't that something worth investigating, something to strive towards? Thank you very much for watching, and if you like this video, you should definitely read the book I stole all of the ideas from, The People's Republic of Walmart by Leigh Phillips and Mitchell Rosworski. And of course, come back soon because I am not done shutting up.